1, 2, 3, 4, yeah.
Hey landlords, and welcome back to another RentPrep podcast. Eric and I are really excited to have Elizabeth Colegrove on the podcast today. I know, Eric, you ran into her in the Bigger Pockets community where we meet a lot of landlords and real estate investors, and Elizabeth had posted about a strategy that she uses with her lease that caught both of our attention. We said, oh, weird, we never heard anything like that, and we immediately thought we've got to have her on here and dig a little bit deeper into this. So Eric, can you kind of give a little bit of an explanation of what Elizabeth was saying, and then we'll go ahead and have Elizabeth give us a little bit of intro on herself?
Sure. I think the thing that kind of struck me with Elizabeth, she's very in-depth and very detailed with your leases. It was something that definitely stuck out to me. And the one thing that really kind of jumped out at me was the idea that you actually charge the first $100 on repairs in your rentals is charged to the tenants. And at first, I probably had that instinct that most landlords would be like, there's no tenant's going to sign a lease that says that. But you said, it solved a lot of problems for you, and I wanted to hear more about that. But before we kind of jump into that conversation, I'd like to hear more about you, your background. I know that you've got your own website, the Reluctant Landlord, and just kind of your experience and what you've learned over the years from being a landlord.
Great. Thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be here. So a little bit about me. My husband's active duty military. So we are at our 5th duty station in 7 years. So we move a lot. And I had to build a strategy around moving. So one of the things that I kind of stumbled into was self-management. We own in 4 different cities in 3 different states, currently looking in a 4th state, 5th city. So I had to come up with a strategy that allowed me to handle it from anywhere. So one of the things that we found doing so was the lease. This was the guide to all tenant interactions. So all of our properties are aimed at young professionals, whether they've never owned or rented before because they're right out of college, or whether they've owned prior. Wait, hold on one second. I'm so sorry, the heater fell over and was burning a hole in the floor. My apologies.
No worries. I would have felt bad if you went through and just, gave up your entire boat because of the podcast.
I would have been fine with that because we're back at a house. But wait, that's a different point of view. Sorry, it was smoking, and I'm like, wait, that's not good. Okay. Sorry. That's never happened in a podcast before.
It's that cliche of, lighting the houseboat on fire while you're doing a podcast.
Right. Who hasn't had that situation, right?
Yeah, twice last week for me.
Right.
So the reason we started the deductible was because we were getting lots of questions like, I want to change a light bulb. Well, when you're a long distance landlord, to change a light bulb, it's $100 to have your handyman come out here. And so we were getting a lot of stupid questions. And so when I first got started, the idea was anything that my handyman said was tenant's fault, they pay for it. Well, after a while, we found that with these young professionals / homeowners who've been homeowners before and now they're rentals, they didn't understand what it meant to be a renter. That yes, you're going to be paying your own filter. You're going to be changing your filters. You're going to be changing your light bulbs. You can't stick down the entire fish, including the bones, in the disposal and not expect it to break it 3 times in 1 year. Yes, that happened. So I got tired of having these discussions because if you have a discussion as a landlord, you never win. If it's not in that lease that you can highlight it, you don't win. You don't win the discussion. So I started a new discussion. The first $100 of any repair was on you. It prevented the fire truck from calling me because the tenants didn't remove all of the filters. They didn't remove all of the lint from the washing machine or the dryer, and the dryer was on fire. And I got a call from the fire department. That was an awesome 7 a.m. wake up because we're West Coast and they were East Coast. Right. And they were like, you should be so thankful the house didn't burn down. And I'm like, why didn't you clean the vent out?
Right.
Really?
Right.
You're making me nervous right now thinking about my rental unit, and I'm like, I don't know if I've addressed that with the renters in that one. I gotta leave right now.
Right? I mean, you don't think and I have stories way more than we have time for. So the $100 is not to have someone not turn in the leaky ceiling. Mm-hmm. It's to have them not put the whole fish down the disposal and then have the vendor say, I can't 110% prove that this fish caused this break because they didn't want to get sued because we were at that level of tenant. So now we just say first $100 is yours. And it's prevented the stupid calls. Like I had, and I love them dearly, but I had a tenant call me out because the thermostat wasn't working and it's 117 degrees out. And so we like, hey, rush, have our handyman come over. She didn't change the battery on the thermostat.
It's usually something that simple and stupid. I agree for sure.
So, but now she paid it. There was no discussion of her not paying that charge. Like there is no more discussion. So what it took out by having this stuff in the lease is there is no more let's talk about it. I found my dream home. I want to leave. And you're like, well, and now it's like the break lease is this. Feel free to pay. We wish you well. Like, congratulations.
Right.
So now by the lease being 20 pages, having all of these addendums, having the first $100, I get to be the nice person. I get to be like, hey, that water heater was really not your fault. It was just old age. No need to pay the $100 versus the tenant who was like, hey, you have $400 of landscaping. We have irrigation systems in our California house. It's just the middle of nowhere. Hey, we have $400 of new repairs from our gardener. Where do you want me to send the bill? And it's like, no, no, no. The lease says we fixed all of them 5 months ago. Have at it. And suddenly you get no more conversation. So, or like, hey, there's a $300 blind and you're like, that just has one little tear and you're like, great, it's $100. Did you want us still to talk to you about it? Oh no, never mind. It was just for your knowledge. And you're like, thanks for saving me $300 just for my knowledge. So it's what you're looking for. And again, you really have to look at your tenants. I hear a lot of people saying there's no way this will work. My tenants aren't going to live in squalor. They are not going to let mold in the house. Trust me. I've gotten those calls and it's mildew, but they're not going to let it happen. So I can charge them $100 to not get stupid calls and to have them troubleshoot, which to be brutally honest, they know how to troubleshoot. It's just, it's a rental. So why do I troubleshoot?
Right.
Now, do you get any pushback when you're actually like onboarding a new tenant, you're going through your tenant screening process and you pull out this, biblical looking lease in length? Do you ever get somebody just like, I can't do this, I'm out?
I have never had anybody go, I'm out. I've had one person push back and they're the person I'm super thankful. I said, absolutely not. Feel free to walk.
Right.
And they're the one that I really needed it for.
Right.
So I did change it for a corporate tenant. And again, I was not like later, it was a bad idea. So no, I have never not been thankful for my lease later.
That's interesting because I think we always push the idea that an application fee is a great screening tool, right? If somebody's not willing to pay the application fee, chances are there's something they don't want you to see, they don't want you to find on their background check or whatever. It's something that we talk about a lot here. But you're almost using the lease in the same perspective, right? If you're not okay with any of this stuff, see you later.
And I'm like, dude, if you can't pay $40, then you can't afford my $250,000, like the filters that are replaced and the various stuff that comes to a large house rental. So then I use that as my first screening. And then my second one is, I don't want to hear from you. These are houses. These aren't $30,000 houses with $1,200 monthly rent. Like I have a very small margin, typically $200 to $500. Like this margin is not to be eaten with stupid calls. I mean, it's to fix the water heater and pay me to deal with this. So I've used the lease as the screening. Like I don't have a lot of screening. The lease is my screening.
Sure.
Don't like it? That's cool. I got 20 other people. And again, you have to know your market. My markets are competitive. So I can screen them. I mean, if you're desperate, and I've been desperate, then you have to make different allowances. But at the end of the day, if you make an accommodation to someone, are you okay with paying the price today or tomorrow? Because you will pay the price.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's funny. A lot of issues that come up here where landlords will call us and say, hey, I'm dealing with this awful situation, or, maybe it's not awful, or just what's your idea on this, or who's responsible for this or that. So many answers that I give always come back to, what does your lease say? What is in your lease? And so in that vein, you've covered it. You've been there. You've done it. This is obviously experience. I think what most landlords tend to learn from. right? The school of hard knocks. You've had a bad situation. You've said, I'm never going to have that again. And now you've retroactively built this lease to protect you and to avoid these situations. And you said it's not something that scares a lot of them away. And I think that's probably the most common thing that I hear from landlords. But you make a lot of great points, not only as a screening tool, but really this is to protect you and minimize your stress and headache, right?
So here's my comment to you. If they won't sign the lease, why? Think about that why and then decide if they're your tenant. I've had people that won't sign the lease come to find out they had no expectation to follow that. They were going to have a dog in it in 2 days. Right. And I'm like, well, wasn't that great to figure that out now?
Right.
Like, I remember sitting down with a lease and a tenant's been great, but we get to the animal part and she's like, oh, yeah, I have a dog. And I'm like, well, it's $50 a month. And we check the little box and we keep going. It's easy. You have an unallowed tenant in the house? Great. The lease says it's $200 a month and here's the fine. It takes out the discussion. I don't want to talk to you about it. Here it is. And honestly, you know the question I get the most from people who sign my lease? Can I have a copy too? I have a rental. I love this lease. That's what I get more than I won't sign your lease.
So the question I have for you in terms of how this lease has protected you, I know you've given a lot of great examples of day-to-day stuff or eliminating silly phone calls and having to go out and change light bulbs. Have you ever had a situation yet, and I'm knocking on wood for you right now, that if you haven't had this, I don't wish it upon you, but if you had a situation where maybe an eviction or just a disagreement that led to the point where you have to end this tenancy, where maybe this lease has protected you even in court?
I have not had to go to court.
Okay.
But again, 50% of my clientele is military, and military has JAG, which is basically like the military lawyers you can go to ask questions. So that's threatened to me all the time. And my lease has gone through them repeatedly.
Right.
And every time they're like, you can't do that. It says right here in the lease.
Right.
So have we gone to the judge? No, because we haven't gotten past the free legal help saying Elizabeth's right.
Right.
So, I mean, I've even gotten like disagreements where it's gotten slightly hostile. Okay, multiple hostile. And every time they're like, darn, your lease is good. And at one time they're like, but it doesn't say I can't abandon the property and move on to base and just pay you rent for the next 3 months. Now my lease says you can't abandon the property and move on to base for the next 3 months. But so, I mean, like there's been a few times that loophole hasn't been out yet. So, you know, we've totally had to put that in. But no, it has saved my tush. Like we had a young couple come to find out they said they were married, which they were, just not to each other. So after 5 weeks, they decide they can't live with each other and they want to leave. And I'm like, great, that's what the break lease is for. She tries fake orders. She tries everything. I have to go and to our legal base and just show them. They're like, your lease says it. You're right. Yeah. And that's it. So not in court, but it's because we've never gotten to court because the lease has been good enough. It's covered it.
Right. That's a great point. Now, you mentioned the break lease a few times. Can you just kind of highlight some of the things that the break lease addendum says in your lease agreement?
Yeah, the break lease says that you can break the lease at any time with 60 days notice and 60 days of a fee. If you give less than 60 days notice, then that becomes a fee.
Perfect. Yeah. I feel like you've covered it all in terms of situations that you're running into. How long did it take you to get to this point of building this rock solid lease with addendums?
Oh, it'll take me the next 30 years because I'm still building it.
Now, we're going to give you a plug here because we noticed that you help other landlords learn from the things that you've learned and learn how to write these rock solid leases, right?
Yes, I do. I actually had so many questions for my lease that I put together all of my addendums and all of my wording. And most importantly, I put together an explanation because it doesn't matter what my lease says. It matters what your lease says for your house, your situation, and everything. So I've shared all my stories and all the reasons why, anecdotal funny and almost sad funny because, you know, when you're in that moment, it's not so funny. But the idea is this is things that I wish we had known. Like when we got started in 2012 and bought our first house in 2011 and rental in 2012, we didn't have this community. Like I didn't know this exists. I found Bigger Pockets, you know, number 4. I found you guys and everybody else in this fellow like real estate community when we were on number 6. And I learned this all the hard way. And I mean the hard way. So my goal of putting this lease together was to share what I learned. So hopefully you don't wake up from that call from the fire department that your house almost burned down.
Right. So how can landlords find you and your resources and get in touch with you?
Reluctantlandlord.net is my website. And if you go to the book, that's where you can find the book. And I'm here. If you check Facebook at Reluctant Landlord, message me. I'm always happy to help. You know, I make my money through my rentals, but I pay it forward because, let's be honest, this community saves each other daily.
Love it. Great point.
Yeah. I think I'm out of questions too. This has been really interesting. And I mean, just the fact that, you know, we almost started with a fire earlier and now we've made it through to the end of the podcast. I think that's a win in and of itself.
I agree. Yeah, it was great having you on, Elizabeth. I think I could definitely have you on again, and we could talk about a lot of different things and crazy stuff that you've ran into. So we'll say till next.
Would love to.
Yeah, we'll say till next time on this one.
Yeah. Take care.